Your childhood fantasy coming true right before our very eyes. Bill Whittle, this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, I'm Scott. And boy, did I get that in the wrong order. In any case, I thought that this would be great news if only for you. You may be the only one in the entire world who cares as passionately about this as anybody else. But New Hampshire has just passed a law called the Jetson Law, which is designed to allow flying cars to use the roads in New Hampshire. Now, the idea here is that some flying cars don't fully meet up to all the requirements for a normal automobile roadworthy vehicle, but they will have license plates on them as cars, and you can drive them to the airport instead of having to drive your car to the airport and then fly your plane. Now, you still can't take off from the highway, but Bill, it sounds like we're getting a step closer to the thing that you felt you were promised.
I know this is going to come as a terrible shock to you, and probably to the 2 or 3 people that are interested in this subject. I thought you were going to say that they'd passed a jetpack regulation law, which would have made me exceedingly happy. Relatively short, a long time ago, it became clear to me when I really started to get into aviation that flying cars are just an awful, awful idea. And the reason that a flying car is an awful idea, and the reason why we haven't seen any successful ones and aren't likely to, is really pretty simple. And that is that all of the qualities that make for a good airplane make for a rotten car, and all of the qualities that make for a good car make for a rotten airplane. And if you were talking about a vehicle that could simply levitate up off the highway and fly onto your destination, I'd be interested. But then, of course, if you could do that, why would you be in traffic in the first place? When I say that everything that makes a great airplane a rotten car, aircraft need to be as light as possible. You're fighting gravity. It's a big fight, and it's much easier to roll something along the ground than it is to put enough energy into it to fly it in the air. So for an airplane, you want something that's extremely light, maneuverable, strong, but basically every gram counts. And as my friend Bert Rutan says when he's designing an airplane, if you're building an airplane and you want to see if the airplane part is too heavy, then you just simply take the part, throw it into the air, and if it comes back down, then it's too heavy. But you want lightweight, and a car, on the other hand, lightweight is pretty much the thing that you don't want. The reason they have spoilers on the back of race cars, or here in Los Angeles on the back of Toyotas, is because the car needs the spoiler on the back is basically a negative wing, an inverted wing, and it's pushing down on the back tires to give them as much traction as possible. So a very, very lightweight car is not safe or stable, and a very, very heavy airplane is not something that you particularly want to fly.
Well, Bill, there are actually 3 flying cars that are already in some stage of production, and people are placing pre-orders for them. The price is anywhere from $120,000 to $400,000. Names include Terrafugia Transition, Samson Switchblade, and that's Samson, not Samsung, and PAL-V or PAL-V. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that, but there are people who are actually planning to get these cars, and New Hampshire wants to be on the cutting edge of this. You're saying that this is something that's never going to take off?
The flying car is a dream that was built into a vision of the future that was basic. I don't want to say it was sold to us, because that implies kind of malicious intent. But a flying car was a vision of the future that I grew up with and people my age grew up with. And basically, it was a fantasy about getting out of a traffic jam. I mean, that's really what the flying car is. You're just tooling along, and all of a sudden, everything just stops. And instead of sitting there like the other schmoes, just push a button, off you go. But if you're talking about a vehicle that you can drive to the airport so that you can take off on a runway, I don't see it. And I don't see the benefit of it in any real way. The flying cars that I've seen have wings that are foldable or stowed in some fashion or another, and that's great. But you're basically in a funny looking car that's extremely lightweight, not terribly stable, which you then drive to the airport, and maybe you drive onto a runway and push a button and the wings fold into shape, at which point you take off. But again, in some designs, you've got a regular motor to drive the wheels, and then you have to have a different motor to drive the propeller. I've seen some flying car designs that are pushed along the road by the propeller, which is not a particularly safe or quiet thing to do. And that certainly the technology is evolving. I think the future, the thing that to get excited about, is not something I would call a flying car so much as I'd call an air taxi. Now that's an entirely different animal. An air taxi would be something that's never designed to be on the road in the first place. The best way to think of some air taxi designs that are out there is to think of the drones that you've seen, hundreds of now, scaled up to human size. And given the GPS technology we have, and certainly with the computer technology we have, this would not require piloting skills. It would simply be a question of, I'm here, I want to go there, you push a button and off you go. One of the problems with these kind of drones that have multiple fans, 4 fans, 6 fans, 20 fans, 200 fans, whatever. One of the problems is, what do you do if one of those fans fail? There are ways to put some kind of basic contingencies into that. But if an airplane engine fails, the airplane will glide. If a helicopter engine fails, the helicopter will glide too after a fashion called auto-rotation. But if you lose one of those fans, you might be all the way out of luck. And the twin-rotor Osprey, which is now a really capable aircraft, but which had tremendous teething problems that the Marines used. Basically, it's one with a giant, enormous, they look like propellers, but they're rotors, and the thing goes up, and then it's a tilt rotor, tilts forward, and then it can go faster than a helicopter. But those things had so much problems because if one engine went out, the other engine had to drive both rotors. There was a joke during the test pilot phase. Somebody put up a hole in the dashboard, and there was a button there that says, in case of one engine failure, push button. And when the test pilots were asked about that, they said, what does that do? And they said, it's a 45 caliber automatic. It goes right into your forehead, puts you right out of your misery. There's no point in delaying the inevitable. But there is a future for air taxis, but I've just looked at flying cars for an awful long time. Burt Rutan built something called the Pod, I think. And I've got the chance to drive that on the ground, which is really fun, and it would fly. But again, it's not something I would want to drive to work or go out to a restaurant. And so I personally think it's a vision that's kind of built into the year 2000 and wasn't really as thought out as perhaps it should have been.
Not even a role here. Let's just forget about the consumer market, but do you see any possible role for security purposes, law enforcement, military, anything like that?
If I were to, what would be the advantage of a car that is on the road that would then have to drive to an airport to take off when you could just dispatch a helicopter? Or alternatively, even if you want to say, okay, the car will be able to take off, even if it could take off vertically, you've still got the same problem. If you're trying to get a police cruiser in the air, you're going to have a very lightweight police cruiser. And if it's heavy, it's not going to perform as well as a helicopter will. So these are irreducible problems.
Well, just being able to get to places where there are not roads, or, imagining in a military situation, if you've got some sort of a Jeep that, encounters muddy roads or impassable forest, to be able to fly over that obstacle and then set back down and keep driving. No value there?
If you're going to have a Jeep that you can throw wings out of, then you have to have a mechanism to get the wings out. You have to have enough level space to get the Jeep into the air. You have to have a separate engine to propel the Jeep in the air, because the Jeep on the ground is just basically propelling the wheels. And once the wheels come off the ground, they don't give you any propulsion anymore. Now you've got a $200 million, exceedingly complex, frail, and lightweight Jeep.
Well, you're assuming fixed-wing aircraft there.
I am assuming fixed-wing aircraft. If you're talking about a rotor-based system, something like a scaled-up drone, then you are talking about a completely different animal. Those may or may not prove to be as effective as helicopters. We'll see. There is a definite future for flying transport. Again, my friend Burt Rutan took a look at the number of pickup points in New York City. So I don't remember the exact numbers. It's like 300,000 potential places for a taxi cab to pick somebody up realistically, or something along those numbers. And to replace the taxi force in New York with flying taxi force out of the question. But there are some exotic designs out there that are kind of interesting and kind of cool. As a person who's had 3 engine failures in single-engine airplanes, the idea of an engine failure is not something that's theoretical for me. I liked all 3 occasions, like being in a plane that was not only a glider. I got started in gliders, but they were all 3 of them actually pretty good gliders once the engine was out. This is a case where we're not talking so much about an engineering challenge as just a simple. It's not even a physics problem. It's a simple design problem. And the best way to sum this up would be, well, why not just design the perfect airplane? Why not design an airplane that could fly super, super fast, take tons and tons of cargo, lots of passengers in comfort, and also land on the ocean and seawater and so on, and be able to put down on a small airstrip in the backcountry? Why not do that? Well, because any one of those design choices locks out other design choices. If you want something that's going to carry a lot of cargo fast, you need a thin wing, and that means you need to take off quickly, which means you don't get to land on short runways. And all of these design features affect each other. And so when you get down to the real nuts and bolts of it, if you're designing airplanes and you want an airplane to go fast, you design an airplane that's going to go fast, you lose cargo capacity, you lose range, you lose short field capabilities, and so on. If you want one that's going to lift a huge load off of a short field, like a C-130 or something, okay, you can do that, but you lose top speed and you don't have a whole lot of luxury and all the rest of it. It's one of those awful cases, Scott. And they're just terrible until you realize that they're there and there's nothing you can do about them, and then you actually kind of get to love them a little bit. It's one of these cases where the reality of the world intrudes upon the dream. And people have been working on flying cars ever since I've been on this planet. And it only comes after really thinking through what driving a flying car would be like. What would driving that car be like? Would it be as nice as driving a BMW? I suspect not. And would it be as nice as perform as well as a relatively high performance airplane? I suspect not. And so if you're saying, especially if you're saying that the thing has, that New Hampshire said, well, yeah, you got to drive it to the airport, but you can drive it on the road. What's the difference between that and me taxiing a Cessna 172 Skyhawk to work down the freeway?
Well, you've given me a lot to think about. I think
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be that guy. I'm usually not, but in this case, I've given this a lot of thought. There are engineering cases where it's an interesting challenge, but in terms of feasibility, I haven't seen anything that would make me a convert.
I'll be all right. I'm just going to put the earbuds of my Zune in and take a lap around the block in my Segway. Everything's going to be fine.
Okay, I got a case of Zima for you if you get a little thirsty on the way.
Thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're grateful that you've taken a moment to enjoy this program, doubtless coming in over the ether into the antenna mounted on top of your house. We are, and the two-way wrist radio TV that you're using as well. The members of BillWhittle.com have made this program possible, and we all enjoy these kinds of futuristic fantasies. It's one of the reasons why they continue to fund us. Also for the daily analysis of breaking news in politics and the military and everything else happening in the news. If you're not yet a member at BillWhittle.com and you'd like to check it out, go to BillWhittle.com and click that big green Become a Member button. We'd be glad to have you. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.
And it was the bipod, not the pod. Sorry, Bert.